Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. So welcome back to another edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton, and I am your host and guide for the next 20 minutes while we delve into everything teamwork. And today's topic is inspired by a webinar that I actually gave earlier on in this week about agile leadership, empowering businesses in uncertain times. And I know that not everyone could obviously get to the webinar. If you'd like a copy of that, please, you can either find it on my YouTube channel or just drop me a note at julia@businesshorsepower.com and we'll get a copy of that recording over to you. But I thought I would just distill some of the key highlights of that 45-minute training into our podcast this week, because I just thought it would be super helpful for you. Because everyone that came to the webinar really found it really useful, gave them a lot of clarity, a lot of new ideas. I'm always about sharing new ideas around leadership and teamwork for you. And so it just seemed like it was a sensible thing to do, because not everyone wants everything in the same medium, and some people just want an audio. That's why I'm doing this one today. So when I talk about agile leadership, somebody actually asked me this on a LinkedIn comment when I was promoting the event. They said, what do you mean by agile leadership? And when I'm talking about agile leadership, I'm not talking about agile as in terms of agile and scrum, which are specific methods around working and getting projects and teams moving forward. I'm talking about agile with really a small a, about agility, and how agility is a key leadership skill today, because leaders need to be agile and flexible and adaptable, and they need to be able to empower their teams to make decisions swiftly. Because I think we can all agree that we live in a fast-paced, dynamic environment. So we need to become more nimble and innovative if we are to survive and thrive in this new era. And for me, unlike traditional leadership methods, which often follow that top-down structure and hierarchical decision-making, agile leadership promotes trust and autonomy, encouraging teams to take ownership of the work. What are a few examples of agile leadership in practice? Spotify perhaps is well known for its agile leadership structures. The company divides its workforce into autonomous squads and tribes and guilds, allowing teams to make decisions and innovate independently while still aligning with the company's overall vision. And of course, this is really important. And that's why we've said purpose is so important, because if we are going to empower people and let them work in this autonomous way, we do need to make sure that we're all heading in the same direction. So what are some of the key attributes of agile leaders as I see it? The first is that adaptability, that ability to pivot quickly in response to the challenges or opportunities. And of course, we saw a lot of this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where a number of pharmaceutical companies came together in order to create the vaccines. And vaccines that typically were taking in the past 7 years to get approved and to create, we managed to compress that time frame to a number of months. So this is the ability of adaptability when people can pivot to all of the changes going on. And I think in this VUCA world that we live in, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous world that we live in, it's so important that we can be nimble and agile in order to respond to the changes going on. Because I think it's also true to say there is no such thing as any certainty in the world anymore. In fact, there's so much uncertainty. We look at the rate of change of technology and it's exponential. So something that worked this week may not work next week. So this is how we need to keep changing and moving with the times. We only have to think recently about the advent of AI. 2 years ago, who had ever heard of ChatGPT? And now a number of businesses are incorporating in the way that they operate in terms of helping them with social media posts, blogs, copy, so many things, graphics, so many things that AI can help us with. But we've all had to learn new skills in order to use that effectively and leverage it effectively. So one of the other key attributes of agile leaders is this empowerment. Agile leaders trusting their teams to make decisions. And a great example of this is Google, where employees are encouraged to dedicate about 20% of their time to side projects that foster creativity and innovation. And as I understand it, that's how it was adopted and created, was in this 20% free time that people had when they were working on their kind of passion projects within Google. So this is how Google gets its creativity, is by providing people, if we thought about a regular work week, it's 1 day a week, isn't it? Working on a passion project, something they're interested in, that then actually has massive benefit to the company. And lastly, one of the key attributes of agile leaders is this collaborative approach. And they're building trust through open communication and encouraging team collaboration. And an example of that is Pixar, and they promote creative collaboration. And this is where all the ideas are shared and improved upon. And this allows for this diverse output. And we've talked a lot in the past on other podcasts about this need for diverse thought. And that's why collaboration is so important. Teamwork is this superpower. When we work and collaborate with other people, we get a whole set of diverse ideas going on. And that means we can get different perspectives on projects and therefore come up with different types of solutions. So why does agile leadership matter in these uncertain times that we're living in? Because as I've said, today's business environment is characterized by this VUCA world that we live in, and factors such as economic fluctuations, technological disruptions, and societal changes means business can no longer rely on static strategies. Agile leadership equips companies with the tools to navigate these ever-changing landscapes. Let's think about the economic fluctuations. When faced with economic downturns, businesses with agile leaders tend to adapt faster by reallocating resources, adjusting their strategies, and even pivoting their entire business model. And again, this is something that we saw happen really predominantly through COVID, for example, a massive economic fluctuation for many businesses. In my own business, I had to be agile and change my business model because a lot of my work was previously done face to face. People would come out. Some of my leadership interventions is with the horses. Obviously, we couldn't do that. So I had to take more and more of my training and coaching and mentoring online. Other companies that we saw really change their business model during the pandemic, of course, restaurants. A number of restaurants all of a sudden started engaging in takeout menus, something that we'd never seen before. Even Michelin chefs started having a takeout menu because that was the best way they could survive, to still be able to serve the needs of their customers when we were socially isolated and we couldn't get together. And obviously, as well, the technological disruption. In the face of rapid technological advancement, agile leaders encourage continuous learning within their teams. And with that enables the organization to remain competitive. And perhaps a great example of that is Netflix shift from a DVD rental to streaming. And we see how Netflix has survived while Blockbuster, also what was at its height of its prime, a high street DVD video store, has disappeared off the face of the earth because it didn't change with the times. It didn't adapt to the technology coming in terms of digital. Kodak is another such example. Camera company. When I was growing up, everyone had a Kodak camera. We all used Kodak film. We went to Boots, our local chemist, and that's where we got our pictures developed. And of course, nowadays everything's digital. And Kodaks, while they are still trading, they have a very limited impact in the marketplace versus what they did 10 years ago, for example. So what are some of these differences then between this agile leadership and this traditional leadership that we see going on nowadays. Because traditional leadership, as I said, is this kind of command and control leadership. It involves tight control over decision making with a clear chain of command. But the problem is that this method slows down responses in crisis or changes to the market. And what we did see was at the start of the COVID pandemic, for example, some organizations struggled to make quick decisions because of that bureaucratic structure, because everything was so centralized. And companies that were able to get and move to a decentralized structure much quicker were able to become more agile and nimble and change things. And so agile leadership is focusing on decentralized decision making, and that enables the quicker responses. But also what it does, it enables team leaders to give autonomy to their teams to make decisions in real time. So again, during the COVID pandemic, we saw this with Airbnb. They pivoted their business model from home rentals to long-term stays during the pandemic. And that's one of the things that allowed them to survive when the travel industry was facing unprecedented challenges. So agile leadership is crucial in times of uncertainty because it encourages innovation, swift decision-making, and adaptability, ensuring organizations can capitalize on emerging opportunities whilst mitigating risks. So what's all this got to do with nature, and what can we learn from nature about being agile? Because the ecology of nature means that nature is really interdependent and interconnected. And nature really appreciates this ripple effect, that something that happens in one part of the ecosystem has a massive impact on the rest of the ecosystem. And one of my favorite videos on YouTube is about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone Park, because I think this is a great example of this ripple impact. Because what happened was the wolves had been pretty much eliminated from Yellowstone Park, but they were reintroduced. And what we saw was that changed the whole dynamic of the whole ecosystem within Yellowstone Park, because the wolves started eating and killing some of the deer and the elk that were in the area, which meant that they were eating less of the plants and shrubs. And that actually resulted in less soil erosion. And so then we saw the rivers start meandering in a different way. And I'll provide a link to the video in the show notes because I think you'll really find it a great example of this ecology of nature and the fact that everything is interdependent and interconnected. So nature there for me has the ultimate model of agility because its survival depends on the constant adaptation to changing conditions. And many ecosystems and species demonstrate agility by responding to shifts in the environment, because they are really thriving through this flexibility, interconnectedness, and importantly, efficient use of resources. And these are principles that we need to, and these are principles that parallel agile teams. So again, let's look at a few examples from nature. The first of all is ant colonies, because ants collaborate as decentralized teams and they adjust their roles and functions depending on the environmental shift, such as food shortages or threats to the colony. And that's a mirror of how agile teams need to work, where decision-making is distributed and everyone plays a role in responding to the challenges. Or what about a flock of birds? That they exhibit this form of fluid leadership. Because when the birds shift frequently, the flock responds dynamically to changes in the wind or obstacles. And what we also see is this shared leadership where we get a different bird that flies at the front of the apex. And where I live on the farm here, we get a lot of Canadian geese that come and visit because there is a pond in the field where the horses are, and they're always coming down. And we see a lot of them congregating during the summer months. And they really clearly demonstrate that V formation that we see of a flock of geese, where, when the leader gets tired at the front, another bird steps up and everyone else is benefiting from the slipstream of the bird going at the front. So they've got this fluid leadership going on. And I think for me, this is a great example of how in agile teams, leadership is situational, with everyone taking a different lead based on their experience or expertise. And what about another example, maybe one that we might not think about so much, which is trees in forests? Because the trees are interconnected through an underground network of roots and fungi. And these share nutrients and support each other during times of scarcity, sometimes known as the wood wide web. And I really love this example because it's such a great example of how the trees are sharing resources and knowledge in order to ensure growth and success. And one of my frustrations when I worked in the corporate world was this lack of sharing of resources within organizations. In fact, always I was seeing organizations wasting time, energy, resources, money, day in, day out. And I was very privileged in my role as the global leader of our hospitality research team that I had a pretty good panoramic view of what was going on in the business. And I always saw teams replicating what another area of the business was doing. And one of my greatest joys was be able to go to somebody, oh, Joe Bloggs, do you know that Sam Smith in this other area is doing a similar project? This is how you guys could collaborate together. Because we just have so much repetition of tasks and lack of sharing of resources in business. And it's just not effective for everybody. And particularly in the public sector, we see this time and time again where resources aren't shared effectively and we're just duplicating things. So what are some of the key takeaways from NHR's agility and their agile system? Again, it's adaptation, isn't it? Nature is constantly evolving and showing us that flexibility is essential for survival. And again, another example of this, again, was during COVID, where we saw companies adapt to remote working. And I think what's really fascinating to me is many companies and many of my clients have been talking about remote working, but how it wouldn't be possible. Oh, we could never do that in this law firm or this accountancy firm or whatever it might be. But actually, when push came to shove and we were forced to do it because everyone was isolated at home, a number of companies have made it work. And of course, today we still have this very hybrid workforce in place with a number of people still working from home. The other takeaway from NHR in terms of agile systems is this interconnectedness. That agile teams function best when individuals are empowered and supportive. Because this also fosters resilience and creates balance in the ecosystem. And I think we can probably all agree that now more than ever, we need leaders and team members to be resilient, to be resourceful. Because that's the third thing that we can learn from nature is about this resourcefulness. Because as I said, nature doesn't waste energy. It adapts its approach based on the available resources. Much like teams need to adjust to processes to meet changing demands. So the natural systems, the natural world is teaching us that agility is not just about quick decisions, but it's about fostering this environment where individuals are empowered to adapt, collaborate, and use resources wisely. And this is why last week I spoke on the podcast about the need for us to collaborate rather than compete. Because when we think about competition, we're approaching everything from a me or an I perspective. Whereas we collaborate, we're thinking about we're thinking about the entire whole and how we can all work together. What I often see is in the command and control leadership, it's really ego based. It's all about I rather than echo based, which is all about we. How can we collaborate together to bring success? So what are some of the benefits of agile leadership for your business? Empowering teams increase engagement and foster innovation. And in nature, we can see that in the horse herds, actually, where the leadership is shared. And I've spoken about shared leadership in the horse herds before with the ABCDE model of leadership. And what we do know is that when team members are empowered, they make faster and more creative decisions because they've got a stake in the outcome. And indeed, a study by Stanford University showed that when team members were empowered and collaborating together, they actually felt more engaged and more resilient. So these empowered teams also can make decisions faster, which allows for this rapid problem solving and innovation. Another benefit of agile leadership for your business is this increased resilience. And just like the ecosystems that recover from the storms, agile businesses can bounce back quicker from disruptions, whether it's market changes or unexpected crises. And in nature, we see this in terms of sometimes the wildfires that happen, how they destroy in one moment all of the vegetation. But actually, the vegetation that then comes back is often more resilient than the vegetation that was there before. We change the dynamic, and maybe shrubs that were on the ground, now that the canopy of trees has been destroyed, and now able to get nutrients and grow. So we see this changing dynamic and this increased resilience going on. Another benefit is the faster innovation, because agile leadership encourages this creativity and experimentation, allowing businesses to stay ahead of the competitors by continually adapting and evolving. So businesses are able to regroup and pay attention to the environment and what's going on and make different decisions. And then finally, agile teams are more collaborative and they can draw on diverse strengths and ideas, which leads to this more holistic, effective solutions. And one of the topics I talk a lot about with my clients at the moment is a pretty hot topic that is coming up time and time again, is the need for working in this cross-functional teams. So many organizations now are very matrix structured. So the people that you're working with are not necessarily people that your direct reports. So a big topic of conversation is, how do we influence people that aren't direct reports of ours, but we need to get them on board in order to achieve our goals? So this collaboration becomes so important and is a key part of agile leadership. And I think as I start bringing this to a close today, I want to share a quote with you that I think sums this up really well. The living world holds answers for us to create a more resilient, regenerative, and beautiful world. It's time to quiet our cleverness, to observe and listen deeply, and reconnect to nature's wisdom by asking, how does nature solve this? And I'm not going to delve in today about how the horse herd solves this and the structure of the horse herd, because I've touched on that in previous podcasts. But just a reminder that horses have been on this planet for 55 million years and humans for just a fraction of that. So I think there's so much we can learn about resilience and adaptability and agility from the horse herd. So as we conclude this, let me just finalize by giving you a few practical steps on how you can build agile leadership. So the first for me is starting with trust, giving teams the autonomy to make decisions and empower them to take ownership. The second is embracing flexibility, being open to changing strategies based on feedback and external changes. The third way we can build agile leadership is by fostering collaboration, encouraging open communication, cross-functional collaboration, and shared leadership. And finally, by encouraging experimentation. We really need to create a culture where it's safe to try new approaches and learn from mistakes. Because if we're empowering our team members to try new things, they're never going to try them if they think that there's any kind of fear of retribution. So this is why we need to create a culture where team members feel psychologically safe, and we can encourage this experimentation so that we can learn from it and adapt and do something different. Because no, not everything's going to work. That's absolutely a given. But unless we try, we don't know. We don't know what's going to work. If you think about Apple, if they had never experimented with trying to create a smartphone, we wouldn't have one today. So we always need to be experimenting and trying new things, recognizing that only a small percentage are going to work. And that really is what Google's doing with that 1 day a week, the 20% of time, where it's allowing team members to work on projects. Those are things, a number of them don't come to fruition, but the odd few do, and they can make a massive change to the business and its success. So in terms of some other practical steps, how can we get some quick wins? One thing I love is a daily stand-up meeting. It's a short, regular meeting that helps the team stay aligned and pivot quickly if needed. We need to know what's going on. We need to know what's happening in our colleagues and what they're doing. Because when we were in the workplace, often we heard about how other projects were progressing and what was going on and maybe any challenges or opportunities they had at that water cooler talk. When we were getting lunch or a cup of coffee, we overheard conversations and we learned that way. We learned through this osmosis. And now with so many people working remotely, we don't. So we consciously need to have this check-in and learn key lessons from each other every day so that we don't have one team that continue to work on part of a project when another team has figured out that there's a problem with that, because that, again, is a wasted use of resources. And this is why we need feedback loops. We need continuous improvement through regular feedbacks to help us adjust and stay ahead. So that's something we can do in that daily stand-up meeting, is have this feedback loop. And nature is always creating feedback loops to find out what's going on and then adjusting and adapting to what's going on. And finally, this shared leadership about rotating the responsibilities within the team to build trust and foster leadership across the board. And as I said, we know that the horses share the leadership, and they provided us some great examples of that. And in fact, I was talking with a guest who's coming on the podcast in a few weeks' time. And he was sharing with me about a company, I believe they're in South America now, that rotated the leadership of the company. It was like every quarter or something like that. So that was such an example of shared leadership. But that only worked because everyone was on the same page. Everyone knew the direction the business was going in. And therefore they could share it, and everyone brought new perspectives and new ideas. And that actually made the business really profitable. So that's just a few of my thoughts this week on agile leadership and how we can use that to empower businesses in uncertain times. So my invitation for you today is to think about, over the next week, how can you adopt some agile leadership practices into your business? How can you become more agile, more adaptable? How can you empower your team members more effectively? And how can you create this environment of trust so people feel empowered to experiment with new ideas within the business? And what are the results of that going to be for you? I'd love to hear what you do in terms of agile leadership and how that's working for you in your business. As always, you're welcome to come onto the podcast and share with us how agile leadership's been working for you, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I said not everything's going to work here, but unless we try it, we don't know. So once again, thank you so much for your time and attention this week. I really hope you found it useful. And if you'd like a copy of the webinar that I produced and delivered earlier on agile leadership, empowering businesses in uncertain times, where I expanded on this even further, please do just drop me a note at julia@businesshorsepower.com, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you about that. Okay, until next time, take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?